Hello, I'm W.T. Edmondson, and welcome to Focus. Freedom often causes unbelievable silence. Well, our guest is no stranger to Focus, the Reverend Dr. Cassandra Gould, and she is the pastor of Quinn Chapel AME Church here in Jefferson City, and also the executive director of Missouri Faith Voices. It has been a while since we last had you at the table. Quite some time. Yes. And quite a bit has happened throughout the city, state, as well as the nation. And so we want to have an opportunity to touch base and see where we are as a nation and as a state. I occasionally will click on Facebook and happen to quite frequently see a post that you've made, and notice that you visited the motherland not too long ago. So take a few minutes to share with us your visit to the motherland.
Yeah. Well, first of all, thank you, Reverend Edmondson, for another invite. There are many people doing many things in the state of Missouri and in Jefferson City. So I count it as an honor to sit in this seat every time I have an opportunity. Last year, in January, I had the opportunity to visit Ghana with a group of seminary students from my alma mater, Eden Seminary in St. Louis, and I went as an alumni and provided some assistance around theological reflection with the professors who were on that trip. It was my first trip. And during that trip, those who were there, our Ghanaian brothers and sisters, reminded us that this year, 2019, would be the 400th sad anniversary of the first Africans being forced to come to America. And they told us about something called the Year of Return. And they designated 2019 as the Year of Return. And I came home with that information and set my schedule around it, took my vacation to do that, and engaged with other colleagues, good friends who are mostly professors as well as pastors in the pulpit as well as in the public square. And we thought what a tremendous opportunity we had to go and be with those we consider brothers and sisters. So I had an opportunity to spend 10 days there. It was providential that I left from Alabama to go there. And so I think one of my posts indicated that I went home twice, basically, Alabama being my home state. Where I'm from, in Marengo County, Alabama, there's red clay dirt. And I'm not a person that walks barefooted, but whenever I'm down in Marengo County in Demopolis, I take my shoes off and put my feet on the land that my ancestors and my family currently owns. And in Ghana, there's red clay dirt. And so I felt home. While it was a vacation, it was still us really grappling with the harsh reality of slavery. As one professor, Dr. Geoffrey Black, who was the former head of the United Church of Christ, put it, America, and particularly Ghana, wrestles with two sides of the same coin. And so enslavement in America and colonization in Ghana basically has had some of the same effects on us. Ghana got its freedom in 1957, and so we went during the time period that they celebrate their own emancipation from the British colonizers, and also they look back to the millions of Africans that came through the West Coast. We visited the castles of the enslaved. That's hard. It was my second visit, and it was emotionally gut-wrenching. And I'd heard people say this, but you can actually still smell the human stench, particularly in the Elmina Castle, which was built by the Portuguese in 1482. We also went to a place that's called the River of the Last Bath. And The tour guide had put it down for 20 minutes, but a bunch of faith people, we ended up having a funeral and a revival there, so to speak. It was a place that when Africans were taken from Central Africa and Northern Africa and brought to the coast, they were actually shackled and taken to this river. It is the confluence of two rivers, to take a bath. And then they would go to the castles and wait the 3 to 6 months either to die or to be put on a ship and brought to North America. And there was something holy that really happened in that space. People talk about being baptized in the Jordan River, but it was something about standing in that water. And all of the pictures that each of us took from that water, everybody remarked it is as if you see faces in that water. And we really felt it was really the souls of the ancestors crying out in that space. So while the trip was on one hand recreational, it also still continued to inform my ministry as a Church of a Black pastor in a traditional Black church setting, as well as the director of Faith Voices. As you know, we continue to put race at the center of all our work and dismantling race, really dismantling all of the ills of white supremacy. And so that trip really continued to inform how I do this work. It continued to allow me to think with other faith leaders and create even more theological framework with faith leaders about what God requires and what the gospel says about this moment and this history and time that we're living in.
Well, thank you for that. You spoke about Faith Voices and being the executive director of Faith Voices. Just for an update for those individuals who may not have heard of Faith Voices, who is Faith Voices? Who and what is Faith Voices?
So Missouri Faith Voices is a statewide, nonpartisan, multi-faith, and multiracial. I used to say organization, but lately I've been saying it's a movement. A movement is that which is led by people, developed by people, and actually does not just have one purpose, but continues to grow as long as there are people with living in pain. Our headquarters, our founding office is here in Jefferson City, Missouri, but we have extremely active chapters in Columbia, here in Jefferson City, in Springfield, and in St. Louis. Faith Voices is a grassroots organization that's made up by faith leaders and community members, and not just faith leaders, also just people who identify with faith. Not just Christian faith, but people who identify with faith in general. And our work is really to shift the balance of power from a political perspective. There's an imbalance, and that's not a statement about one party being in control over another party. That is a statement that says we are living in a time in this country, in this state, and in this city, even the city where laws are made, that policy has been put over people. And so I believe that our role is to shift and to make sure that people are at the center of all political activity, and that people are empowered enough to actually be able to make decisions for themselves and to influence the kind of policy that regulates their lives, and so to speak, whether it is the kind of policy that the school board has around disciplining the discipline of children, policies around payday lending, policies around who gets to access health care, policies around gun control. All of those factors have to be really centered with the people. And so our role is really helping people not to realize their power and to equip them with the political knowledge and the tools so that they can actually influence that process.
Full disclosure, I'm on the board of Missouri Faith Voices. So there's going to be a clergy training in St. Louis, matter of fact, this coming week. Share a little bit of information about that and why this is important.
Yeah, absolutely. Missouri Faith Voices is a part of, as you know, the Faith in Action National Network, formerly PICO. And we had a name change May of 2018, mostly because it took too long to explain what PICO was. And it was an acronym that in different parts of the state, in different parts of the country, meant different things to different people. And I had the pleasure, of being on the transition team, really researching and analyzing like what the name might be. And we thought that faith in action was what we did. Mm-hmm. We put faith into action. And so anyway, we have the privilege for the first time of hosting our national network in St. Louis. It's actually 3 tracks. There are approximately 50 to 60 clergy from across the country. The instructions was basically to invite clergy that had a real clear analysis about the work of justice. And so not those who are still trying to figure it out, that's another training, but those who actually had done some of the work, those who have the tools and actually demonstrate their ability to be able to preach and teach prophetically, those who stand up for justice. And so we're excited about this group of leaders, and I know you're one of those that will be joining us. In addition to that, there are other directors like myself from across the network. Currently, we are in approximately, I should know this like I know my name, mm-hmm. But we have more than 100 federations in over 100 cities. And so now some of those cities are ran like ours by one director, but there are approximately 40 to 50 directors that will also join us. There's also a cohort that has come out of the network, the political leads cohort. And you had to apply and be chosen and et cetera. And I was managed to be accepted into that cohort. And this is a small group of people from the network, mostly staff, that are really looking at the role of faith-based organizing, particularly in 2020. Looking at what we're up against and what is it that people actually need to actually stop feeling powerless, and how do we actually shift the conditions in our communities. And so we're excited about hosting that. Our staff is poised to be there and welcome people into the space. I also believe it's important. 5 years ago, before I sat in this seat, when Ferguson happened, when Mike Brown was murdered in August of 2014, within 48 hours, I called what was then PICO national staff because I felt like we needed help in Missouri. And PICO came in, and not in a way to control what was going on the ground, but really assisted people in the community. And they've not stopped since that time investing in the organizing in the St. Louis area. And so it's kind of apropos that, as we are in this 5th, another sad anniversary, that they would come to St. Louis.
I'd like to thank you, first of all, for assisting in formalizing Missouri Faith Voice relationship with then PICO. Because we had been working through PICO, mm-hmm. but we were not formally a part of PICO. And so thank you for your efforts in formalizing that relationship. How many affiliates and what are their locations again throughout the state?
So Missouri, it's 4 of us. It is Jefferson City, Columbia, Missouri, Springfield, and St. Louis.
And if other cities wish to associate, how would they go about doing that?
So we would actually love, and as we look at being a statewide organization and the only faith-based statewide grassroots org, we certainly have our eyes on the Kansas City next. It makes all of the sense in the world, as well as other areas in the state. And if someone is interested in that, probably the easiest way is to go to our website, Missouri spelled out, faithvoices.org. And there is an area that says contact us. and we would love to meet with you. I would come personally and meet, maybe get the closest organizer to you now, and then we can talk about all the steps that it takes to actually start to create a chapter in that area.
Okay. Missouri Faith Voices continually collaborates with other organizations throughout the state. What are some of those organizations that we work very closely with, and why is that collaboration necessary?
Those that come to mind immediately, Jobs with Justice, in Missouri Rural Crisis Center, in Columbia, Missouri. Metropolitan Congregations United, they do the director and I sometimes joke that we're like Coke and Pepsi of organizing, but we work together in alignment to make sure that we are working in a coordinated fashion. Organization for Black Struggle in St. Louis and Action St. Louis are very important partners for us. Part of it is also one of the things that's a tenet of Faith Voices for our staff is not to ever do anything solo. Don't create a plan without having those who are thought partners with you, those who you are co-creating with. And so even for me as a director, it's important to be in relationship, and not just relationship, but literally collaborating and thinking with others who are doing similar work to what we're doing. In addition to that, one of the things that we realize is that to move anything in the state of Missouri, you need 1.4 million people. And as powerful as Faith Voices has become, we can't turn 1.4 million voters out. But collectively, grassroots organizations, and so those are the ones I work with really on a daily basis, but locally, the NAACP, Empower Missouri, the ACLU, there are other organizations who we also work with to help us depending on what the issue is, and to make sure that we are reaching people in the communities across the state.
As I was preparing and researching for our conversation today, came across a piece. Reverend Jonathan Augustine, he is the national chaplain for Alpha Phi Alpha fraternity, and he reviewed a piece written by Dr. Eric McDaniel, who had written a book entitled Politics in the Pew: The Political Mobilization of Black Churches. And he states that recent social political events have created an environment to make the black church great again, returning to a high point of the same prophetic political activism of the 1950s and 60s civil rights movement. As you hear this, what is your assessment of that statement?
And so two things. I would say, as one who is a product of the black church, that's all I've ever known. Educated in spaces of white church, went to white seminaries, but as a product of the black church who rose from the pews to the pulpit, I don't think that there was ever a time that the church wasn't great. What I do believe is that there was a shift in the country and in our community post-death of Dr. King, post-desegregation, integration, that the church and the community did not hold up the kind of tenets that the civil rights movement was built on and known for. I don't know, and I can't attest to whether it was weariness, but I also do believe that there were social economic factors that influenced that. I believe that as at least visible laws went away, like redlining and et cetera, and as we started, as people started to integrate into other communities, that the church lost some of its political power. People don't view church membership, not just in black churches, but across the board, according to the Barner Group and Pew Research, church membership has declined. It is no longer really the focal point of people's lives, There was a time when the church was the cultic center, and you walked to church, and it revolved around everything that you did. And so whether it was your Boy Scout or Girl Scout meeting or the NAACP meeting, it was in the basement of the church. And so technology, those other social factors that I've named actually moved that away, right? And then there was this thing called prosperity gospel that happened. It didn't happen to all of us, thank God. But it also had this influence, and I think part of the culture of the 80s was this period of individualism. And so people started to suffer from what I call the my four and no more gospel. So if my husband and my two children are all educated and doing well, and we're not as worried about what's happening next door or across the street. And so I do think we have this opportunity now, and I really believe that Ferguson really became the impetus for it, to be reawakened, so to speak. I think we've started to kind of sleep on the job, and I think it's in that sense, a kind of factual critique.
Dr. McDaniel cites multiple factors as requisite conditions for a black church to become politically involved. One, pastor/leadership is interested in involving the church in politics. Two, membership is receptive to the idea of political involvement of the church. Three, the church itself structurally is not prohibited from involvement in political matters. And finally, four, the current political climate necessitates and allow political action. A lot, but I know you can handle it.
I'm going to start from the bottom up. The current political climate necessitates that black church, white church, everybody gets involved. It necessitates that we no longer be silent. When I read the gospel, and when I say the gospel, I just mean the whole Bible. God always says something about kings in the First Testament who are silent while widows and orphans suffer. And I believe, and Jesus says something about the Pharisees and Caesar in their silence. And so that mandate has never gone away. There's always been something to say. I do believe that he is correct, that if you don't have a structure that allows you the flexibility of saying something, if you don't have people that are receptive to you saying something, and if a pastor or other leaders are not inclined to be involved, that church will just sit out. When you look at the records, I'm from Alabama. I would spend every summer in Birmingham. My uncle was a Baptist pastor. I can remember going into 6th Street Baptist Church with him, and him telling me, and that was the scariest thing to tell a little girl, about the 4 children, the 4 little girls who were killed in the church. And I can also remember him going to meetings and etc. Well, years later, 2 years ago, in Alabama, and my cousin has a book on her coffee table, Churches of the Movement. And I pick up the book, and I'm expected to see a lot of churches that maybe my uncle preached at, or was invited to preach, or churches that we went to worship with in the evening, all these programs. Where are you? They weren't there. Ferguson hits, they weren't there. You start to count the number of people that were there, and I think fear is a factor. I believe, he didn't talk about that, but I believe fear and courage are a factor. I also believe that we have misguided notions about the separation of church and state. The separation of church and state was a historical document from approximately 1803. I'm been out of history class a little while. But from approximately 1803, that was actually written to some Baptist folk in, I want to say in Massachusetts, maybe Connecticut. And it actually talked about the church really protecting itself from the state. I believe that the way that we've interpreted that, it was designed to keep the state from being overbearing and meddling with the church. It was not designed to keep the church from holding the state accountable.
Yeah.
And I believe that over time, because I'll hear pastors say, well, what about separation of church and state? Jesus does not separate church and state. And now he says, render unto God what's God and what's Caesar is Caesar's. But he's killed. He goes to the cross because of insurrection, crime against the state. Now, with that being said, I can understand why some people are afraid. It's risky business.
Yeah.
But I believe that it is the role of the church, and especially of the black church. I mean, we are 400 years of oppression. And so now the chains, you know, we might not be walking around in shackles, physical shackles, but we're in educational shackles, we're in, you know, healthcare shackles, we're in psychological shackles because of 400 years of trauma.
And one thing that you're talking about, involvement in politics, involvement in politics is not allowing a politician to come in your church once a year at election time and you say, well, I'm involved in politics.
That's right. That's exactly correct. I remember, you know, the journey to ministry. I can remember sitting in the pews and having a pastor that was very politically inclined, but in my opinion, not really smart enough to hold the politicians accountable, because we only saw them maybe once every 4 years, right? They come parade across on a Sunday morning, and I remember thinking, all while denying that I was called, when I become a pastor, you will not come and parade across my pulpit, right? And so even in the city, if you call me about coming to my church, we got to have a long conversation, right, about what that looks like and why. And if I don't see you when you're not politicking, my parishioners won't see you. And to date, no one's been in my pulpit like talking to my members. We just don't do that.
Also in the same article, I also spoke to political activism of one of your fellow AME clergy, the former pastor of Quinn Chapel, the Reverend Dr. Mark Tyler, and his involvement as pastor of Mother Bethel AME Church in Philadelphia, and his involvement in his church as well as the community being politically active. The AME Church has a rich history of political engagement, so it is natural for you to walk in those prophetic shoes, speaking truth to power. How do you speak to a fellow clergy who is not opposed but somewhat apprehensive about taking that step?
Yeah, and Dr. Tyler's a really good friend. He's also a part of Faith in Action. A lot of his political engagement is also through Power, the Philadelphia affiliate out there. And you are right. There are those of us who it is a part of our denomination's DNA. I was having a conversation with a colleague, Andrea Alexander from the National Council of Churches, and we were talking about the history of Quinn, actually. And she said, so, like, there was not, like, some, you know, white savior, so to speak, that gave you all the building. And I was like, no, these were enslaved people who bought their freedom and, you know, got their own building and etc. And I know that everybody's, you know, ethos and history is very different. But what I would say is, actually, I would walk people through. I went through a period of time where I was just mad at people. I'm like, what is wrong with you? Like, why can't you do this, right? And I was reminded of my son who wasn't a good math student. And I would get really frustrated with him because I was the kid that was on the math club. And one day I came to myself and I said, he's not in the math club. And your frustration is not going to help him. And so even recently on one of my posts, I said, if you don't know what to say, call me. And I actually had some people actually from across the state call me. One of the things that we're going to reinstitute in Jefferson City is our kind of theological think tank. It was the clergy table, but I really want to give local pastors opportunity to actually really walk through the Word and figure out how to actually interpret it with the justice lens, how to not make the text say something, but actually be able to identify what it is. If you're a Christian pastor, any pastor, any faith leader, rabbi, imam, or other faith leader, what does your sacred text say about justice? And so in real simplest terms, before somebody can get to one of those tables or even call me, ask yourself that question. If you are called to preach, what does your sacred text say about justice? Now, if you don't find your text saying anything about justice, then maybe you shouldn't either. But starting with that basic thing, and then make it as simple as making a list, like how many times is justice or poverty or those who are considered marginalized, like widows and orphans, how many times is that mentioned? And what is said about it?
Yeah.
And what is said about those who don't say anything?
Speaking to that, could you share the various denominations and faith represented on Missouri Faith Voices Board?
Oh, absolutely. And we just took in 7 new board members that we're really excited about. And we are not admittedly as multi-faith as we'd like to be, but our board does represent for Christian perspective, we got Christians in all brands. We have Methodists, we have Disciples of Christ, we have Baptists, we have United Methodists, non-denominational, and Muslim, Reformed Reformed Jewish, and I think off the top of my head, that might run the gamut of those who are currently on our board. And we certainly live into what it means to be multi-faith, even with our staff. So currently I think all of our staff is Christian, but one of the things that we practice even in our weekly staff calls is reflections and even pushing even our Christian staff members to look at other sacred texts and to realize that God does not just speak in one language. And so I am really proud to work for an organization that's really intentional about what it means to be multiracial and multi-faith.
In preparing to close, could you share with us the top issues that Missouri Faith Voices have identified as those issues that you will focus on in 2020?
Yeah, and some of that work with rotating some people on and rotating off and some on the board, some of that work still remains in our strategic planning. But issues coming into an election season, the census is extremely important. We are going to start some training in the fall around what it looks like to actually engage. How can communities of faith and other community groups engage in preparation for the census? That is, I would say, before we get to even voting in the 2020 election, that is a really high priority. In addition to that, as you know, Medicaid expansion is something that we fought long and hard for in the state of Missouri, from shutting down the Senate to other ways of trying to get Medicaid expansion on the table. Currently, finally, as of last week, a ballot initiative that has been launched, and Missouri Faith Voices is engaged with some of the partners that I named earlier in gathering signatures for that ballot initiative. And that ballot initiative will mean that in November of 2020, similar to when people signed initiatives for clean recently and raising the wage, that Missourians across the board will have an opportunity to vote. And what it means in simplest terms, if you are a mother who makes more than $4,700, I think I'm actually a little over, it's about $4,333, you can't get Medicaid. Now, you can't afford insurance, but you can't get Medicaid. And so a yes vote when that comes to the ballot will mean that hundreds of thousands of Missourians who deserve health insurance will actually have that.
How many signatures will you have to gather?
We will need 172,000. And last year, just to give listeners an idea, or viewers an idea, when we did Clean Missouri grassroots orgs and others gathered more than 340,000 signatures. So we believe that it can be done.
Okay.
Yeah, so Medicaid expansion, and we are currently, we continue to fight for predatory lending. We actually are closer, way closer than we've been to a national move for a 36% rate cap. And we really have it on good authority that it'll be bipartisan support for it, and we continue to work on that, and debt collection.
Reverend Gould, we never have enough time to touch on everything that we need to touch on. As you indicated, poverty and racial justice is at the forefront of Missouri Faith Voices efforts. So we want to thank you for your work that you do. I know that we keep you busy, but you love it.
Yes. Thank you, WT.
All right. God bless. God bless.
Bless you.
We have been speaking with the Reverend Dr. Cassandra Gould. She is the Executive Director for Missouri Faith Voices and the pastor of Quinn Chapel AME Church here in Jefferson City. Please take time to be engaged. 2020, the election is right around the corner. We need you to be engaged, not only nationally, statewide, as well as local. Your local elections are even more important because it's closest to you. We'll see you next time. God bless.